So let's address the elephant in the room before anything else. This video is really late. However, because of a certain anime that popped up during this year, that being Steel Ball Run, I had to delay the JOJOlands review for this year up until now. And thankfully, because of that, it has led to a very interesting development, as the first act of the JOJOlands has concluded. A major first for the JoJo's franchise, as we don't usually have this very act-centric type of story being told to us very plainly. On top of that, we have a time skip, which is completely unheard of within JoJo's. So with that being established, I'm happy to say that this video is sponsored by Opera GX. As of late, Opera GX has gone through a total facelift, with a browser that's more customizable than ever before, with built-in ad block and VPN protection for your internet browsing. So whether you're watching anime or researching a video like I do for the most part, you'll be completely protected, and maybe even get a few bonus anime to watch thanks to that VPN. And it's easy to set up just by going to the settings and literally flipping a few switches, you're all set to browse. And while you're there, you might as well customize your entire Opera GX to your liking. And I do mean the entire browser, whether it be a dedicated wallpaper, animated or still, sounds associated with background music, keyboard sounds, and even opening and closing your tabs, customizable icons for your sidebar, or the literal icon on your taskbar. And if you're feeling a little bit freaky, you can add a whole shader to the entire browser, making it a whole new experience. All of these customizable features come in different forms and shapes, whether you want it to be Naruto, Berserk, Pokemon, JoJo's for example, Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball, and so much more. Doesn't even have to be anime related, it could even be gaming. Going through a massive Monster Hunter kick at the moment, with so many more features. I'm barely at the tip of the iceberg here. One of those features being my favorite, being the video pop out, whether it be YouTube related or watching an anime in the background while I work. Opera GX gives me the ability to multitask regardless of the scenario. And don't be afraid like I was, you can import all of your browsing history and bookmarks with just a few simple clicks. All you do is have to press synchronize in your settings and boom, import all your bookmarks and history. It's as simple as that. Don't be a background anime character. Upgrade your browser and become the main character of your browsing history. Thanks again for Opera GX for sponsoring this video. I want JOJOlands Year 3 and its review to be just talking about Act 1 primarily for the most part, and giving some speculation to Act 2 later on in the video. On top of that, because we now have an act-based system in play here, I think this is a perfect time for anybody who's not caught up with JoJo's to latch on. So in a way, this video also serves as a introduction for new readers to latch on to probably one of Araki's best works as of recently. And for anybody wondering, do you need to watch my previous 2 reviews on it? Kind of, sort of. Because I have to cover a lot of things in this video, I won't be going into major detail about a lot of things. However, in those previous 2 reviews, there wasn't much to talk about at the given time, so I yapped for a little bit more. So if you want nicher details or more nicher opinions, go back to those previous 2 JOJOlands reviews, as this video will be covering Act 1's major highs and major lows. But don't be scared about any of that, because hopefully if I did this video correctly, you'll probably be reading JOJOlands yourself, or possibly rereading it like I did. With that all being said, hello, my name is Metas. Walk with me. Okay, first things first. I'm going to do a brief synopsis of the beginning of the story, a non-spoiler synopsis by the way, for anybody who is interested in the JOJOlands and just wants to read Act 1 and then a few years later read Act 2. So after that, it's going to be full-on spoilers and me talking about every individual arc in some detail, giving my thoughts and opinions of what Araki has been building over the past 3 years. Got it? Okay. The JOJOlands is the story about a boy becoming filthy rich. This boy being JoDio Joestar, the descendant of Part 7's protagonist Johnny Joestar, and the nephew of Josuke Higashikata, the protagonist of JOJOlands. JoDio's life is one of calamity and absurdity, whether directly his fault or not. In defending his older brother against some very evil and mean children, had caused a calamity between his mother and father, as his father lost his job because of what JoDio possibly did. Because of this, the family enters a financial problem, where now the Hawaiian Mafia can prey on their weakness due to a lack of funding, and the poverty that comes with it. Luckily, an opportunity does present itself for Dragona and JoDio, the Joestar siblings. That opportunity being presented by Meryl May Q, a principal who is not totally out of the realm of asking some kids to run some, let's say, nefarious acts for a decent price. Through these operations, they meet Paco and Usagi, key members that would form Team JOJO in the near future. With their team established, they go after their biggest mission yet. They go after a $6 million diamond that belongs to a certain mangaka in mind. However, they find something much more valuable than a $6 million diamond, a lava rock that possesses the ability to manipulate the flow of wealth, whether that be physical, spiritual, or personal. If JOJO were to claim this rock and figure out its deeper mysteries, he could potentially become filthy rich by manipulating the mechanism it controls over the universe. However, he's not the only one that wants it, whether that be individual stand users, corporations, or potentially the US government. The stakes are extremely high, however the reward is even higher. Can Team JOJO surpass the odds? The answer might just surprise you. Okay, so with my announcer or narrator voice out of the way, that is your last warning. That is the very basic synopsis of Act 1. If you're at all interested, pause the video now, go read the 20 odd some chapters of Act 1 of JOJOlands, and then come back and or watch the previous 2 reviews, and then come back to this video. Do it in any order you want to, or hell, get spoiled, doesn't matter to me. As long as you read it, I don't care. That all being said, let's get into some of the details I want to talk about in Act 1 of the JOJOlands thus far. So when it comes to the introduction of our 2 main characters here, that being Dragona and JOJO, I think personally, till this day, 3 years later, that these 2 characters' introductions are probably some of the best in the entire franchise, given the fact that they are, funny enough to say it, complete and total assholes. They will lie, they will cheat, they will do illegal activities for a fair price. They are not your normal Joestar. However, because they are Joestars, they are still kind and caring to a certain degree. That degree only being, of course, their mother. Like I said in the synopsis, she has fallen on hard times after her husband left her as he moved to the mainland United States. So it's up to Dragona and JOJO to protect her in the shadows. Now here's something I didn't mention in the previous 2 videos, nor the video I did on both Dragona and JOJO, that being of Dragona's older sibling responsibilities. With the absence of her father? His father? We still don't know if she's trans or not. That we're 3 years into this. Actually, hold on. Script break. She might be gay. He might be gay, or reverse gay. I really don't know what Araki's really doing with her pronouns here. I'm still confused. Like 3 years later, it's just getting more complex. So if I say either or for Dragona, please do not get mad at me. Anyway, Dragona being the oldest sibling means that she has to at least carry a lot of the burden that her father has left in his absence. This comes in the form of protecting JOJO from going absolutely butt fucking sane thanks to his antisocial personality disorder, which leads him to be, how do you say, a bit aggressive if you looked at the first chapter of the JOJOlands. And over the course of Act 1, and very, very heavily hinted in Act 2, it seems like he's going to break any day now and show off a pretty drastic side of his personality. You could call this the Brando side of his personality, or the Dio side. To be totally honest, I come back month to month to read the JOJOlands mainly because of these 2. I love their dynamic, I love the drama with the family, I like their deeper personal issues. They are an amazing duo. And because of their dynamic, I think what really grips a lot of people in to reading this series month to month, just like I did, was because of that first chapter, seeing their true colors against those police officers, because they really haven't changed a lot since that first chapter in terms of their deeper personality cores. And how could I forget about Paco and Usagi, our other teammates that we meet in the early intro of JOJOlands. Very similar to the Joestar siblings, these characters are equally as morally gray, maybe even more so, depending on how you see it. Now, Paco is a little bit of a hard-ass type of character. At moments, he's very stubborn. At other times, he's very forgiving, but like in a transactional type of way, looking at his fight with Charming Man that we will see later on. However, if you care for him, he will care for you. So he's definitely one of the characters that will heavily support you if you support him, looking at Meryl. Now, all of this makes sense given his backstory. He didn't have a mother figure, and his father was abusive, and he doesn't really like authority all that much. Given his backstory, he was honorably discharged from the US military. And of course, being a gangster like the Joestar siblings, he steals from people. Who would have figured? And when it comes to Usagi, I'm going to be honest here when explaining this, because I haven't done it in the past 2 reviews, and definitely after kind of reading up to, the Act 2 part up until recently. If you don't know, it's mainly focused around Usagi, is that Usagi seems to be like the character who is really here out of circumstance the most in comparison to everybody else. Usagi has a fucking terrible life. His father died to a car crash. His younger sibling has some crazy medical bills that need to be paid in order to keep them alive for the most part, and it seems like his mother doesn't really all that care much about him. It's a lot, and I know that's more explained in Act 2. I just want to kind of cover the basis here. It really sucks to be Usagi, and on top of that, his stand ability, insert here, it's a King Crimson reference, I cannot speak Japanese for the life of me, is very dependent on other people rather than himself, so he can make objects for people, but it's really focused on somebody else asking him for help while he can't help himself. He's a very sad character, and at first when the team meets him, he definitely seems like a druggie and somebody that seems like he's not very reliable. However, that's pretty contrary to the belief because he is very reliable. So much so that eventually him and Paco team up for a specific fight I want to talk about very soon. But despite all of that, Usagi will still do anything for the bag, so he's just as fucked up as the rest of them. So when you take a step back and look at our four-man group here, like I have said in previous videos, this is probably one of the best modern JoJo teams in a very long time, as it seems like Araki's really trying to develop the team's relationship and how they work within this part very heavily. Everybody gets screen time, trust has to be built for new team members, that eventually sticks to Charming Man, but we'll get to him. There are friendly interactions between all of them. They themselves are individually very interesting characters that make a greater whole. This is absolutely a JoJo's group at its best. For me personally, if I'm not interested with the Joestar siblings during a given chapter, the overall group does. And while I would like to talk about Meryl, the mastermind of getting all of these high schoolers in a group to run petty, like, illegal activities to make them all money, I think I'm going to save that for later, like in an Act 2 review, because I think she will get development later on in the story. But just note, their boss is as equally, or even more so, a bigger dick and evil person than all of them. But I like her because she's evil. Or like at minimum, like morally gray, but I like the fact that she's not a goody two-shoes. Character intros aside and group intros aside, we can now move on to the villa on the Hawaiian island. Our introduction to the lava rock and the grander conspiracy it holds. Now the first part of the villa arc is actually, in retrospect, really good. Now I think a lot of my opinions are kind of the same here, aside from two new ones I've gotten from rereading it. That being, I think Rohan is really cool for the idea that he represents two Jodio, and the fact that Jodio doesn't need to use his stand in order to win fights, and what that means for his character later on. Now hold on, before I talk about those two new points, let me set up the idea of what I think about the Diamond Heist part of the villa arc. Very cool introduction to the whole group in a setting like this. I think the Hawaiian vibes are cool. I think the untrustworthiness of Usagi at this point adds to a lot of tension and the drama that is currently taking place to this infiltration to Rohan Kishibe's villa in Hawaii. I also think this serves as a great juxtaposition to part 5, in which a lot of the gangsters in Italy seem to have like a justice complex to their criminality, or aren't shown enough to be real criminals, while in part 9 it seems like Jodio and group seem like they are on hard times and they need to get money fast in order to save their lives. And because of that, I think Araki does not want to tread on previous topics he's already talked about, already has explored, and or is trying to improve on previous mistakes. All that to say is that Team Jodio is supposed to be a real criminal group with real criminal backgrounds that make sense, however seem sympathetic, but that goes for all of them over time. And then when you put all those characters' backstories within a group and see them clash, or at least form around each other, it leads to a much more interesting story. That all being said, let's move on to the new points I want to talk about when it comes to the beginning of the villa arc. So when it comes to Rohan, I've never personally liked the insert character archetype, especially when it's so blatantly obvious that kind of is Araki to at least a very fantastical degree. However, as of recently and during this era of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, currently within the franchise, Rohan isn't really a self-insert anymore and is more of a tool to discover of what the world building of JoJo's is actually like. While JoJo's is the exploration of the supernatural answered by stands, there are way more things within the JoJo's universe, in both universes mind you, that can't just be answered with "it's a stand." Because within Thus Spoke Rohan Kishibe, Rohan is finding animals with impossible origins, actual yokai and demons, and literal deities. So him being in the possession of a lava rock that has the ability to control physical, monetary value to oneself and or spiritual wealth to oneself is totally up Rohan's alley. However, it is such a grand object that he himself could never solve by himself. And that's where we get introduced to the JOJO group if this was a Thus Spoke Rohan Kishibe story, which it is not, kind of half sort of. But that's why I like it. The group is about to be introduced to a massive revelation of what this object can do on a massive scale. So instead of introducing a new character to explain all of that, it's literal genius to just use Rohan because he's already experienced a lot of these things previous to part 9. But how do you get the morally superior character, not by a lot though, to help the criminal crew? Simple. You figure out the problem together. And if he doesn't help you figure out the problem together, you just, destroy the last remaining object with the ability to literally get you as much money as you possibly want. Genius kid. I absolutely love him. And in that process, it shows us two different things about JOJO. Number one, his mental issues aren't actually a major problem here for the most part. They're an underlying issue, but JOJO can creatively figure out situations where he doesn't need to beat someone's ass all the time. So it throws us for a curveball showing that JOJO, in reality, is actually extremely intelligent, forcing his enemies to help him for both of their benefits. And second, it shows off that JOJO is not the type of character to use his stand to win arguments and or gain the upper hand. He's using something else completely differently, that being his charm or his intelligence, in order to move the plot, which I don't think a lot of other Joestars do. And the fact that JOJO does any of that is not because, he needs to do that or it's better to do that than using his stand in order to, convince Rohan to help him. It's because of the fact that Rohan's fucking overpowered. Who would have figured? Heaven's Door has always been busted. Soloed the entire team practically aside from JOJO until, he threatened to destroy the lava rock. For the most part, my previous opinions in different videos explaining the Diamond Heist section of the Villa arc are practically the same, but now on a third reread, I'm finally kind of figuring out that it's supposed to be a Thus Spoke Rohan Kishibe story that eventually folds into a mainline JOJO part. With that all being said, we can move on to the later portion of the Villa arc, that being the Jungle Warfare section. And here are where the criticisms are going to start to fly. Personally here, I think the cats are really boring. Being a longtime fan of JoJo's, I've been introduced to a plethora of stands before, and I genuinely think the idea of a stand cat user is awesome in theory. However, in comparison to previous animal stand users, the stand ability of making wires to sever off limbs is, I don't know, very underperformative, at least in my mind, because animal stand users tend to have some really cool abilities, and this one just seems meh. And I know there's some extra flavor text being the fact that all three of these cats can use the same stand, but even then it doesn't really add a lot. It's just not a very interesting villain to fight / observe, in my personal opinion, in comparison to previous animal stand users who have some pretty gnarly abilities. Fun fact, they seem to be the most elemental based stand users with the entire franchise, funny enough. Iggy controls sand, Petrop controls ice, Stray Cat technically controls air, so I kind of expected here that the cats would control fauna or grass. So I kind of expected maybe instead of steel wires, it would rather be vines that constrict your limbs and then eventually that you can just rip them off. Would have been a better idea in my head, but I definitely would have saved an animal stand user for later in the part, given the fact that they're so unique within JoJo's. But I think this fight is okay, given the fact that I don't think we're supposed to be actually focused on the cat stand users, but in fact our actual group here itself. Even before chapter 1, the group has already been established, so it's a bit hard for us to grow with the team as of right now because, we don't know the full team yet. Technically speaking, on a first read, we don't even know the full backstory of the Joestars just yet. On top of that, Paco as well. So how do you get the viewer to connect with the team before a retrospective reread? Simple. You use Usagi as the new guy to grow with the group, therefore making the reader grow with the group as well. So Usagi runs away thinking he's betrayed the group, but then he comes back to clutch it out, making the team win in the end, therefore gaining the trust of the team. This same narrative tool will be used on Charming Man later, so we the audience can grow attached to Charming Man just as well. To just jump the gun, Usagi will always be in these scenarios for two reasons. Either A, for us the audience to grow with the team furthermore, or you kick the puppy so the entire group reacts in order to save Usagi, because he's technically not a very combative stand user due to his character being more helpful for other people rather than himself. In reality, he is just a giant narrative tool, but a very cool narrative narrative tool. I actually very much like Usagi, given the fact he's a puppy-like character, so of course I would. Which brings us to the ending portion of the Villa arc, where the team tests out the lava rock and meets Charming Man, who at this point in time is their enemy. Now, my opinions on the testing the lava rock portion of this arc are fairly the same. I do very much enjoy it. I like how Usagi interacts with Dragona. Dragona's an interesting character herself. Of course, I have to make that bit continue on. And it's just a joy to read the team figure out how this lava rock actually properly works. However, in a bit of a surprise rereading this for basically a third time now, I think I've grown to appreciate the lava rock and its mystery to such a high degree that, personally, I think it's my favorite JoJo MacGuffin. Previously, it was the stone mask, given the fact that it's very nostalgic, has a very in-depth history, and everlasting effect on the Joestar clan, even though it's not present after part 2. But there's something the lava rock does that the stone mask could never do for me personally. That being, it forces the characters who wield it to proactively find wealth, as it doesn't do this passively. Okay, that was like a half lie. Technically, it does do it passively. However, it has to be in an environment where spiritual wealth or physical monetary value items are nearby in order to make those items gravitate towards it. If not, it's just a rock. And this is my favorite part. If you want a specific item with a high monetary value associated with it, you're going to have to put yourself in a very awkward and uncomfortable situation for the lava rock to acquire it. Case in point being when Usagi and Dragona wanted to steal some watches. It never would have happened unless they were in that room with those watches. And funny enough, talking about said room, we learn a very interesting detail about the lava rock. It seems like when you are in control of the lava rock, or at least the dominant possession holder, people and stands will just subconsciously just give you their items of extreme wealth. Even your own stand, looking at Dragona. And the added kick is the person that is under the influence of giving that object to the lava rock won't remember it, including you if your stand does it for you. So not only is the lava rock interesting to read about as a MacGuffin itself, it also forces our protagonist and the plot itself to be in this there's a bomb underneath the table but the characters don't know about it type of scenario, because the lava rock will make things gravitate towards it but at random intervals. So sure, you can get the said expensive thing, but it might take some time or it might take no time, and during all of that there's fire and chaos all around you. But we'll save that for the asset collection portion of Act 1, which is coming up very soon. So we can move on to the Charming Man portion of the Villa arc. And funny enough, just like the testing of the lava rock portion of this video, I really don't have much else to say here that I already didn't say in my previous video. I like the constant back and forth that Charming Man gives to Jodio, Paco, and Dragona during the course of his fight against the main team as of now. However, big Charming Man criticism here. At the end of their fight, aside the backstories that I do love a lot, Charming Man goes for a killing blow against Dragona, which involves her having to use smooth operators to remove her bleeding neck injury to something else. Aside the fact that smooth operators is ridiculously busted, eventually leads to Jodio fighting Charming Man nearing the end of their fight. And then Paco proceeds to say, after fighting him beforehand, he actually is shit at what he's doing. Let him join the group, Jodio, as they're fighting underwater. Even though he went for a killing blow against Dragona, and if she didn't have smooth operators and the fact that Usagi's there to, use like his ability, Mate Kumasai, cannot pronounce that thing for shit, to effectively heal her, she would have been dead. So why he's allowed to be in the group so easily does irritate me a little bit. I think that it is some plot-induced stupidity there, because Usagi had to prove himself over the course of these chapters, explaining his ability and how he's helpful and a whole bunch of other stuff to prove to the team that he's not a drug addict and he's not actually any of that stuff that they had the preconception of him. But Charming Man gets a free fucking pass because he sucks at what he does. What? He tried to kill Dragona. What are we doing? It's really funny if you look back on it, and it is definitely with future foresight that Charming Man is going to be used as a plot pusher moving into Acts 2 and further beyond. So of course Araki has to make an excuse for him to be in the team. Now, for the most part, I've been talking about the negatives of this section of the Villa arc. However, I think the major positives here are definitely the lava rock and its shenanigans that it does during this portion of the fight, and the backstories that do get explained here. Because wow, even on a third reread, these are really hard to digest just because of what the source of the material is talking about. It's pretty heavy still. Like, to get really serious, the fact that JoJo has these issues is very concerning even for a fictional character. So seeing that grow and develop into something that could be possibly a problem later in the future does put you on edge just a little bit, because it's not like the previous dark determination moments previous JoJo characters have had, which have, like, at least to some degree, the intention of being helpful. JoJo's inner rage, I would like to describe it as, seems a lot more malicious than truly helpful, as it causes way more damage than good in reality. But I think that's something for a different video for a different day, as it seems like this rage will have a pretty major breaking point probably during Act 2, because I do think Dragona has a point while she is talking to him during the bus incident afterwards. He has problems and they're going to need to be solved one way or another. And now we have reached the latter portion of Act 1 in the land exchange operation, with the first section being Bag Groove's attacks. After Team JoJo figures out how the lava rock works, Meryl sets her eyes on a portion of land that the Howler Corporation owns that is worth a lot of money. So if they get in control of the deed, they own it. It's simple, right? Not exactly. At this time, the Howler Corporation is facing a lot of pressure from the US government and the bank that controls it. So in order to tie loose ends, Lulu and Bobby Jean are sent out in order to fix up these problems. However, Team JoJo gets caught up into it, and Lulu and Bobby Jean set their eyes on Team JoJo. So after receiving the deed, after the lava rock controls it, Lulu's stand, Bags Grooves, activates, causing some pretty crazy chaos on the road as a team slowly becomes infected with cancer. This all being a reference to Lovers and Steely Dan from Part 3, as Lulu and Bags Grooves share a lot of similarities with this past Part 3 character, at least in terms of standability. While I think the fight is overall entertaining, and this is just an excuse to move from one location to the next, I do have a little bit of a inconsistency problem here with the fact that nobody can turn their stands small. This being kind of a thing shown in Part 3, however, is completely forgotten about here during this initial encounter with Lulu and her automatic stand. While small attacks are present during this initial encounter, nobody becomes small, which I'm disappointed about. I wanted to see a small November rain. It's not a major criticism, but it is there. And if you're not a hardcore fan like me, I doubt you would even care. Overall, it's a very fun stand encounter that leads to some pretty great tension within the group itself and leads to a stronger bond for everybody involved. While all of that was happening, the woman that helped them secure the deed unknowingly was also affected by Lulu's stand. Because of that, everybody just meets up at the hospital. However, she's no ordinary person. She is daughter to the governor of Hawaii, who is currently in the process of seizing Howler's land. What a coincidence. Which leads us into our next section of the lands exchange operation arc. Everybody arrives at the hospital and it begins to go down. I wonder where I've seen this before. While the arc is starting, Howler is dealing with the bank as he begins to believe the mechanisms that allow him to be so fortunate are moving towards somebody else's favor rather than his family's name, as he clearly knows what the lava rock is, thanks to his family backstory. Aside from Howler, Team JoJo is still trying to figure out their cancer problem thanks to Lulu's stand, which leads to a fated encounter with Bobby Jean. And I'm gonna be honest here, here's where I'm going to start to bitch a little bit. I don't like this stand fight, nor the amount of dialogue presented in this arc, as I really do think it's a bit of a text wall drag and a very uninteresting stand battle. This is our third bullet-based or gun-based stand user in the franchise, and genuinely, I think there's other gun users who are more interesting with better abilities, not to mention people with similar abilities in Part 5 who do his whole gimmick better. The slowing of bullets down to then just make them speed back up again in order to kind of like psych out your opponent is, I don't know, just very uninteresting to read in comparison to the grander story taking place here. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm more interested in the main plot of the story that's going on rather than the stand fights, even though for a long time watching and reading JoJo's, I've always been the inverse of that. I've always loved the stand fights because I think they're just so fascinating as a concept. But this is kind of a first for me. I just had a very tough time reading this portion of the story. I think for the most part it's because of the stand and Bobby Jean. I think Lulu was cool, but in addition to this, it's just I don't know, uninteresting read. I really can't pinpoint it exactly, but it's just not that very entertaining, aside from, you know, Howler losing his land and the team coming closer to stealing said land. Outside of that and Lulu, I don't know, the dialogue just seems very unfun here and a little bit of a text wall. I can't believe I'm saying it, but I just prefer the bratty, greedy, selfish child character that is Lulu over Bobby Jean, who is the guardian figure for Lulu at this time. Until, well, the best part of the arc actually shows up, where JoJo uses his stand to completely fry the dude, because apparently JoJo not only can control the rain that he produces with November Rain, but the moisture by proxy. That's fucking awesome. Simultaneously during all of that as well, the banker that pressed Howler into losing his land also shows up to the hospital as well, leading him to get injured because of the stand fight, which allows setup for the next arc in question. Because JoJo is not just taking Howler's land, but Howler's assets as well, at least in legal form, thanks to the banker in question. So Team JoJo does not only have the seized Howler land, but all of his assets all in one go. And with Bobby Jean dead, they also steal Lulu? What the hell? And by proxy, save Usagi from her stand attack. I think overall, when it comes to this hospital fight, the fight itself just isn't interesting. I just don't like Bobby Jean, and Lulu just kind of becomes a background threat until Bobby is dealt with. It's kind of a meh for me. But aside that, Howler, the bank, the overall plot with the governor and his daughter, and the seizing of not only the land, but all of Howler's assets is just way more fascinating to read than a stand encounter, which is a definite first for me. And now we're finally caught up. The last thing I talked about in last year's review was in the asset collection arc, and luckily, because I waited so long thanks to Steel Ball Run, it has finished, and now we have moved on to Act 2. So this is the final portion of Act 1 of the JOJOlands, and I definitely have to say this with my whole chest. This is indeed the best arc, and Araki delivered a banger. So far within the video, I've been talking about the highs and lows and my personal feelings of Act 1 of the JOJOlands. But when it comes to the asset collection section of this video, I don't think I have a single complaint. Given that fact, for whatever reason, if you haven't read the Part 9 manga up until this point and have just been spoiling yourself, I highly recommend you to just stop the video now and read this portion for yourself, because I genuinely do not want to spoil it to you. That's your final warning. This is a perfect way to end an act. So the ending of the arc starts off like this. Team JoJo has a bit of a problem. While the team is ready to steal the physical money of Aka Howler, they get a call that some of his goons are looking at Mero's location because of Paco's history involved with the military, as they found that out. Meaning that the team has to split up in two now, with JoJo, Dragona, and Charming Man stealing the physical wealth of Howler, with Usagi and Paco to save Mero from Howler's goons. While not entirely said here, the implication here is that Mero might not be a stand user. She might not know that her underlings here, that being Team JoJo, are stand users, because not at all during this entire encounter, as Usagi and Paco are trying to save her, does she ever use a stand, and or her stand is not very combative, so she can't use it just in general, meaning that she's fucked. She needs to be saved, as Lem and Ningbo are a general threat to her safety, and we'll figure out very soon that they have possession of Lulu, who is revealed during this arc as well to be the daughter of Aka Howler. So there's a lot at stake here, aside from the money. And since there's two encounters here that are technically battles, but one is a lot more different than the other, I'll just explain the simpler of the two, that being, of course, Paco and Usagi's encounter at Meryl's fashion store. As Lem is figuring out Meryl's secret, Paco and Usagi show up. A stand battle occurs, with Ningbo taking up a majority of the fight for himself, with Lem being trapped downstairs with Lulu. A magnificent back and forth between Paco and Ningbo takes place here, with Paco just showing him that he's no joke with his hands. He's definitely a fists merchant. Even though Ningbo has the ability, thanks to his stand 200 balloons, to basically inflate a person's muscle or skin to basically just explode, Paco, thanks to his stand ability, is able to kind of weave around it, at least for a little bit, making the fight a little bit of a back and forth. It's a really interesting read rather than me explaining it. While that is all taking place, downstairs, Lem is questioning Lulu about Lulu's connection to Howler and what Howler said said to Lulu during this arc, because Lulu knows about her father's obsession with the lava rock and how he wants to own it as well, keeping his family fortune. But it is also simultaneously revealed during that encounter that the people that Howler hired don't have his best interest in mind and would rather steal the lava rock for themselves. So now it's become a free-for-all in Meryl's store. Switching back to Paco, Paco is still fighting Ningbo. However, in a crazy reversal, Ningbo grabs Paco, allowing 200 balloons to activate on Paco's other hand. However, Paco then reverses that, breaks his grip, and then shoves his fist in Ningbo's mouth, causing Ningbo's lower jaw to just burst. And somehow, even though his lower jaw is just completely busted, demands Usagi's gun. So he just wants Usagi's gun so he can fire it at Paco. However, that causes Usagi's stand to proc, allowing Usagi to get the final blow and kills Ningbo in the process because of his stand. And while Ningbo is literally dying, or literally is dead by this point, Lulu tries to kill Lem because, of course, this person doesn't have her best interest in mind and is threatening the child. So, of course, the child stand user is going to activate her stand. So Lulu gives Lem cancer and then incapacitates her by proxy. Therefore, meaning Meryl is safe and Team Paco and Usagi successfully get the recovery mission done. No notes. Absolute cinema. Everybody played their role perfectly here. Paco was a shit-talking badass the entire time, forcing Ningbo in some very uncomfortable situations with his stand, with Usagi even playing a factor, while simultaneously having a stand fight occur downstairs that Lem had no right to be in because her stand doesn't have actually any combative qualities other than the gun she wields, because her stand senses out fear. It's the perfect saving the hostage fight. I don't have any bad things to say about it. I genuinely do believe this is probably one of the better stand encounters within part 9 so far. So while that is all happening, simultaneously JoJo is running Howler for his fucking foams. Charming Man disguised as the previous banker who took his land rights is now here for basically everything. So Team JoJo is telling Howler, hey, sign these papers and you'll probably get out of the US government's hands for the most part. This is a lie. The US government's still going to take Howler regardless, because it is revealed now that he might have terrorist weapons on his private land. We don't know if this is true or not and might be a conspiracy. We'll probably figure that out in Act 2, but it puts Howler in a corner. Give everything up for his freedom or keep everything and deal with the consequences later. Besides Howler, Key West is telling him not to give up anything because, weirdly enough, she's a lawyer and is seeing through the bullshit of Team JoJo right in front of her. Howler's not really concerned about that, given the fact that he's trying to figure out why the flow of wealth is going away from him up until the very ending of the fight. I know this is a lot, but there's even more. Key West eventually figures out about the lava rock, kind of sort of, through Lim, who got it from Lulu. So now she's against Howler, but Howler doesn't know about that. However, neither of them know that Team JoJo is in possession of the lava rock, and we know that the lava rock, regardless of even if you want to keep your wealth, you will subconsciously pass it over to the lava rock regardless, meaning that Team JoJo is just waiting for the wealth to pass from Howler to them. And on top of that, the US government is outside of Howler's boat, ready to take him, with them all being stand users ready to use their stand abilities. What a fucking premise. Howler only budges once he realizes the lava rock is in the room with him, on top of the fact the US government forces them all out of their negotiation room, leading them out into the open, causing Key West to use her stand ability against Charming Man, forcing JoJo and Dragona into a stand battle against Key West's West End Girl, which has this crushing-like ability, forcing Charming Man onto the floor. But in doing so, JoJo and Dragona drag her to the pool and forcefully put her in a large vinyl pool ball, incapacitating her. During all of that, several US agents were hurt, causing even more pressure on Howler as backup is imminent. But despite all of that, and Howler kind of figuring out by this point that he's not going to give up his family's wealth because of what his grandfather said to him so many years ago. But despite that, the Rock controls everything. So, in order to save his life, he signs the paper and disappears with his mysterious stand called Eclipse 8 in Mysterious Mist. JoJo has won, and that concludes Act 1, as they're able to get off the boat, given the fact that they're not Howler. Absolutely no notes when it comes to the Howler encounter. It was a multi-layered stand battle, lava rock encounter, US government, and technically US president, I forgot to mention that, involvement, the stealing of land, just tricking the team, while also simultaneously a whole other stand battle on Hawaii was taking place with Paco and Nimbo. There's no critiques. I'm just gonna say how it is. It's cinema. Absolutely perfect. Some of the best work I think I've seen Araki put onto paper. Genuinely. A master at his craft of suspense, stand fights, character development, character backstory, all of it. No notes. It might be Araki's best work. I'm not kidding. So, with that all being said, taking a step back and looking at Act 1 in its totality, what do I have to say? While this video is a partial review and partially a opinion piece, I genuinely have to say with my whole chest that I think Act 1 of the JOJOlands is by far Araki's best work when it comes to introducing a JOJO part within its first act. I think that because of multiple factors, whether it be the moral gray conundrum of the Joestar siblings, Paco, Usagi, Meryl, the very interesting plot and MacGuffin that is the lava rock, the mystery of Charming Man's brother mysteriously disappearing, Rohan's involvement in the story because of said lava rock, and the grander conspiracy of how Howler will be moving on forward within the JOJOlands, because he may or may not be a villain who comes up in this story, and why the US government wants this piece of land as well, because I do have my conspiracy theories about that as well. It's a fascinating read and Araki's best. I can genuinely only compare it to Steel Ball Run and some of my other favorite JOJO parts being Part 4 and Part 5, with the only downsides being a few nitpicks here or there, some inconsistencies with the stands, and a lackluster stand fight, but there's only like one of those so far. So I think it's a pretty solid like 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10. And if you haven't reread Act 1 in a very long time, I highly recommend you do so, given the fact that you don't have to wait month to month for it, because I think reading it all at your own pace is a genuinely cool experience, because I say that every time I do it. And before I close the video out, you're probably going to ask me, Metas, what about Act 2? Well, it's been out for a very short time now, and there's only a few chapters within the time skip of the JOJOlands Act 2. However, I do think a lot of the best qualities Act 1 was showing do show up within the few chapters we do see within Act 2, so I'm very excited for it. And of course, next year I'm going to review it just the same like I did last year, and eventually make a video very similar to this one once we get enough of it. So with that all being said, like, comment, share, subscribe. If you like me, consider supporting me over on Patreon. Stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Deuces.